All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another Holistic Learning Career Seminar. Today, we're here with Andrew Krafft, an airline pilot for United Airlines. Thanks for being with us, Andrew.
I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to help and provide any knowledge I can to anybody that's interested in this career field.
Awesome. Well, we'll get right to it. Could you tell us a bit about the path you've taken from high school on?
Sure. So I grew up outside of Chicago, and I was always interested in aviation. I lived near O'Hare. So as a junior high school student, I would just look up and see planes flying over into O'Hare and thought, well, that looks really neat and fun. Wonder how I could become one of those guys. And so I asked my parents about it. They didn't really have much knowledge. They were not in that field. So I just started looking around to see how I could learn to fly airplanes for a living. And probably about mid high school, I looked into ways to become a pilot. And one of the ways was through the military. Uh, and so I started looking at programs that would provide me an education, a college education, a stepping stone to be an airline pilot. And one of those fields was the military. So started looking at different military programs, which eventually led me to interest in the Navy. Wanted to, growing up in Chicago, it was cold in the winter. And so I thought I need to get somewhere where it's warm. And so I thought the Navy would be a good place to be and fly out in the Pacific. So I applied to several programs in high school. I applied to the Naval Academy and to Naval ROTC for a scholarship to college. And I was fortunate enough to receive a 4-year scholarship to college. And so I happily accepted the scholarship when I graduated from high school and went on to Purdue University on a Naval ROTC scholarship. That was sort of the beginning of my track to fly for the Navy. My ultimate goal was to fly for the airlines, but I thought, well, give the Navy a try and see if I like it, and who knows, I might stay for a career. So I went on to college, and throughout college, I was involved quite a bit in Navy training because ROTC prepares you to become a naval officer. So every summer, I would go out to sea on a ship or some officer training program. It brought me all around the world in the summers between my academic years at Purdue. I studied engineering at Purdue and was fortunate enough to graduate through lots of struggles, and it was challenging, but I was able to graduate from Purdue, and I took an exam through the Navy and applied for pilot training and was accepted into pilot training for the Navy. So upon graduation from Purdue, one of the nice things about ROTC is that when you graduate college, the day after graduation, you start getting paid. And so you start receiving a paycheck from the government as a young officer in the Navy. And it's enough to live on, and it was fine for me. And then probably within a couple of months after graduation from college, I found myself in Pensacola, Florida, as a student naval aviator, where I began pilot training. And it was a lot of effort to get to that point, but I would say that really nobody in my family knew much about the program that I entered. So one of the things that I remember my dad telling me, he gave me some really good advice. My dad ran an advertising agency in Chicago, And when I approached him and said, "Hey, Dad, I think I want to go in the Navy or want to fly for the Navy," he didn't have any knowledge about those programs, and he cautioned me away from joining the military. Uh, Nobody in my family had been in the military except my grandfather, who flew in the First World War. It's another long, good story. But he, this is the mid to late 70s, and he just, Vietnam had just ended not too long since I entered high school. The military was not very popular. And he cautioned me from doing that and said, "Why don't you just get a degree in business, come work for me, live in Chicago. It's a great life." But I just had this desire to fly for the Navy. It was just something I thought would be really cool. And one of the, I guess, motivating factors for me was that we did have a guest speaker come into my high school who had flown, or was currently back then flying for an airline. And he came in sort of a career day where we had all these different professions represented on career day. And you could go and listen to each person. They had someone, they had lawyers and doctors and business people and tradesmen. And then they had this airline pilot. And so I remember talking to him about, how did you become an airline pilot? And he had flown in the Air Force. And he said, that's a path to flying for the airlines if you want to look at the military. And he was initially somebody that gave me the insight to at least do some research on my own about, hey, what is it like to fly for the military? And of course, since I wanted to be in the Pacific, and I just had an interest in the Navy, so I pursued the Navy. And I did apply to the Air Force, but I got accepted to the Navy first, and I accepted my offer. So that was my initial plan. But I would say once I did tell my parents, hey, I still remember the letter coming in the mail. I had, it's a long process to get accepted to these programs. It takes a lot of effort. I knew that in high school as a freshman, I knew that one of the requirements to get into the Naval Academy or ROTC was that, you had to have good grades. You had to be involved in some sort of athletic sport, club activities. I was very busy in high school. I enjoyed. I was in the band. I played soccer. I was in Boy Scouts. So, but frankly, to be honest, when I took my SAT and ACT scores, they were about average. There was nothing spectacular. And I was, when I applied for the program, it was recommended to me that I take the SAT a second time. So I ended up hiring a tutor and taking the SAT a second time to improve my score. But one of the great things about ROTC is that I still remember my score improved, but not spectacular. It was better, but they looked at the whole person concept. They looked at grades. They looked at involvement in the community. They looked at extracurricular activities. And so I had quite a bit of those that I was involved in. And I really have to give credit to those other parts of high school that I was involved in, other than just an SAT score or an ACT score. And mine were average. So I did apply to the Naval Academy. I didn't get the nomination out of my district because of my SAT scores weren't competitive enough for the appointment. But it ended up working out well for ROTC. So there are other traits than just a score on a SAT test. So I'm very thankful the program looked at all those other options too. And my grades were very good. So I was very fortunate to get into the program, get through college, go to pilot training, and finish pilot training. It's about a 2-year program to get through pilot training for the Navy. So started in Pensacola, And about a year and a half later, I received my wings in Corpus Christi, Texas. So uh, started in Pensacola. 6 months later, I transitioned to Corpus Christi for advanced training. And I selected Maritime Patrol for the Navy, which is a land-based multi-engine airplane that does patrol all over the world, looking for ships and submarines and um, lots of travel. So I was fortunate enough to earn my wings in the Navy. And um, after earning my wings, I was assigned to Hawaii. So my dream was coming true. I was going to be stationed in the Pacific. And I started my tour in the Pacific. So in 1988, I earned my wings as a naval aviator. And I reported for my first assignment flying the P-3 Orion. So after some training in San Francisco at Moffett Field in the P-3, I was sent to Hawaii. I spent almost 4 years flying in Hawaii, which I think I was 24, and it was a wonderful tour, just a great time. There's positive and negatives to flying for the military. The positive side was getting a chance to live in Hawaii, and from Hawaii, I flew all over the Pacific. I've seen more small islands in the Pacific, flying patrol, flying with the other Navy ships in the Pacific, other battle groups around aircraft carriers that we provided patrol for. And so that side was just a fantastic adventure. The downside, there are some downsides. Downside is that the military, you can't say, you can't wake up one morning and say, I don't want to fly that mission. It's not what I want to do today. You really don't have that option. So there are times that I was assigned a mission that I didn't really want to fly, but you were trained, and that's part of your job. So, sometimes you might get assigned a location that you don't really desire to go to, but I would say, you can't really say no to those because you've committed yourself in the military. One of those was 1990. Desert Shield broke out, and our squadron was assigned to leave Hawaii and fly to Oman and establish at a military base in Oman in preparation for what became Desert Storm. So I flew 25 combat missions over Iraq as a young Navy pilot. So those were challenging missions, but it's part of our job to do in the military. Sometimes you have to go places you don't really want to go, but you are trained to perform your missions. So that's what I did.
How much of a role did fear play in those unwanted missions for you? How did you handle the pressure of a real combat situation?
That's a great question. I would say that through training kicks in, and I do remember we did conduct a lot of training scenarios, and our job back in 1991 was to look for Iraqi gunboats on the water, and then identify them and pass that information on. And we also carried ordnance if we had to drop ordnance, which we did on one occasion. So, but you have to rely on your training. But more recently, I mean, that was back when I was very young. More recently, I also, I just retired 7 years ago from the Air Force. So I spent 12 years in the Navy and then 17 years in the Air Force flying C-130s. And so later in my career, I was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. And your question's very applicable to that situation as well, because as a Air Force Reserve C-130 pilot, we were flying once a month out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So it was pretty easy. Then in 2003, our unit was mobilized and ordered by the president to fly overseas to Iraq. And we were there, and nobody knew how long we were going to be gone. So we were initially told you'll be gone anywhere from 2 to 6 to 8 months. But at that time, I was a reserve pilot flying for United Airlines. As a reservist, you are always on call to be activated by the president, but it rarely happens. But in this situation, it happened. And I can remember one of my first missions over Baghdad, we got reports of small arms fire against aircraft trying to land. And my job there was to carry, we were cargo carrying aircraft. So we carried troops from all over the world, coalition troops, supplies, cargo. But being told with a helmet on and your headset, there's small arms fire and RPGs and heat-seeking missile threats at a field we're going to land in, you really have to rely on training. You get focused on your mission and you rely on what you've been trained to do. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that'll be quite informative for our students watching.
Okay.
Now, one thing that some students might be wondering at this point is how is the work-life balance? I guess in the military as a pilot, and then as a commercial pilot, in
Sure.
both cases you have many obligations, and sometimes you're gone for days, weeks, or months at a time. So how have you navigated that?
Another great question. Well, there's two very different careers when you compare flying for the military and flying for the airlines, two very different paths. And I'm also mentoring some young people in my area that live near me who want to be pilots. Some don't want to be in the military, and some do. And I always tell them there is no direct path to become an airline pilot. You don't have to go in the military. If it's something that you don't want to do, that's okay. There's other paths that guide you to flying for the airlines. And flying for the airlines is completely different than flying for the military. It's a different mindset. Both offer wonderful training. Both offer situations that can be very challenging. I left the Navy after 12 years and was fortunate enough. I applied to United Airlines and was hired. I think I was 34 years old. Just got out of the military and I was hired to fly for United. That's a very different mindset. United Airlines, it's a fantastic job, but you're probably not going to fly where someone's shooting at you. You're not going to have the same situations. For me, I was very fortunate, and if I had to do it over again, for me, I would follow the same path. But that's not for everybody. You don't have to be in the military to be an airline pilot. There are many programs to go into the military that you don't have to be full time. I didn't know some of these programs existed in high school. I thought you had to go full time in the military. That's not really true. There's the Air National Guard, the Air Force Reserve hire pilots who had just graduated college to be part-time pilots. I didn't know that. So that's another avenue. In my reserve squadron in Milwaukee, most of the pilots had active duty military experience. But not everybody. We had pilots who were lawyers, businessmen, airline pilots who decided, I think I want to join the reserves. So those programs exist as well, and they're great programs. But I would say, in answering your question, it's different types of flying. One, you're flying for a company. You're flying for a company that's basing their profit on customer service and flying people from point A to point B. And they're going to train you to fly these wonderful airplanes that United has, and all the airlines, frankly, have fantastic equipment to fly. And you'll travel all over the United States. And as far as United goes, because that's my experience, you'll do a lot of international travel. So one of the things that appeals to me about being an airline pilot is it's a little more stable lifestyle compared to my time in the military. And the travel is, I mean, I travel all over the world every month. I'm usually gone 2 to 4 times a month, somewhere around the world that I'm flying to. But
now,
how
have you managed to keep up with family life? Let's say, given that for as long as you've been working, you've always been here or there, and often been away from home for a long time.
Another great question, Eli. Being a military pilot, you're gone a long deployments. So for me, I didn't have a family, so to speak, of my own. I didn't have a wife and children. That friends of mine who were married and had young children, I would say the tough part of being in the service is that because you really can't say, no, I don't want to go away for 6 months. You can't say those things. So, but as a young single person, it didn't affect me as much. So I didn't really have a family of my own until I was very close to retirement from the military. So I had my son is 11. He was born just a few years before I retired from the Air Force. So I didn't feel the strain so much as other people, other friends of mine who are my age, who missed out on some of those things with their children. And that is something to consider. I mean, I'm being as honest and frank as I can. These are things to think about. So if a high school student is thinking about, hey, it'd be really cool to fly for the Navy or the Air Force, it is cool. I wouldn't change anything. The pros, the advantages are you'll make long, life-lasting friendships. You will get to know people very well, and you'll live with these people not only just during the day, but you deploy around the world. You get to be very close to the people you work with. You get to fly some incredible equipment. They pay you well. The benefits are fantastic. So there's a lot of pluses to becoming a military officer, military pilot. But you should be aware, like, wait a minute, I don't want to be committed that long, because if you do become a pilot today in the Air Force or the Navy, it's a 10-year commitment after you receive your wings. When I came through the Navy 30 plus years ago, it was a 6-year commitment upon winging. So those are things to be aware of. Like, hey, when I get my wings, I might be 22 years old. And today it's a 10-year commitment. So before I can decide to get out of the military, I'll be 32 years old. But if it's something that you enjoy, the other benefits to the military, there are there's medical benefits for life. If you retire, there's a pension system. There's some really nice benefits. But I would say to anybody, don't go in the military because of those benefits. Those are just a result of the service that you're providing. I would encourage anyone to take a hard look at it, ask a lot of questions, talk to people like me, talk to people about their experiences, and to be honest, what did you like? What didn't you like? Would you do it again? Like I said, I'm mentoring several people in my area, and there's a young man who just said, I have no desire to go in the military. I said, that's okay. So I'm helping him on his flying path. And what he's doing, he's going to college to a local university in Chicago that has a flying program, and that he'll graduate with a degree in aviation technology. And he'll start down a path of building up his flight time. to eventually get hired by a commuter airline and fly smaller planes, build up experience, and then he'll be able to apply to a major airline. And as far as flying goes, the major airlines will be in need of pilots because all the airlines are expanding and growing, and they anticipate after the COVID pandemic the burst of travel in the next 2 to 3 years. And people like myself will be retiring from the airline. So at the age of 65, it's a federal regulation that you'll have to retire from the airlines. So there's constantly an inflow of young pilot, which is good. That's the way it should be. So I would tell any high school student, if your ultimate goal is to fly for the airlines or fly for the military, start looking at the different paths to take. And there's many, many paths to achieve your ultimate goal. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. There's lots of great information, wisdom there. So just before we wrap up, do you have any personal advice that you can offer to our high school students as they embark on the next chapter of their journey, perhaps something to do with how you've prioritized your own well-being despite working many, many thousands of hours over the years?
Sure. I'll give you one piece of advice that my dad gave me, and it has stuck with me all these years. I graduated high school in 1982, and I can still remember him telling me, even though he didn't want me to go into the military, what he did say was, he sat me down. He said, Andrew, I would really like it if you came to work for me, but I know you want to join the Navy and fly. He said, but whatever you decide to do, he knew nothing about the military. He said, just if you enjoy your job 50% of the time, then that's a job you might pursue. And I've held that very simple ratio because, like I was explaining to you earlier, my experiences in the Navy and the Air Force and flying in combat, I have over 165 combat missions, and I've been all over the world. But I would say that ratio works out pretty well. And if mine has been above 50%, so if it's 50% or greater, you might be happy in your job, because not every job, you're not going to be happy in it every day. There's challenges. There's days you wake up, you don't want to go to work, you don't want to fly. There's a lot of exams and tests, and sometimes you'll have to study for hours and hours and hours for 1 hour in the air. There's a lot of challenging work, but the rewards, if they're 50% or greater, the rewards will outweigh your overall happiness. And that's something I try to tell my son, who is embarking on junior high, that and no job is going to provide 100% satisfaction all the time. And if there is, great. But if it's a job that you will not like at least half the time you're there, then you open up your horizons and maybe search other things that might make you satisfied in whatever you pursue. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks very much for taking the time, Andrew. I'm sure this has been quite useful for our students, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, I'm very happy to help. Best of luck.
All right, bye-bye.